All right. Okay, everyone, good evening. Thank you very much for coming. Welcome to the Pulitzer's convening sessions on biodiversity reporting. It's me, Dyna Rochmyaningsih. I am a freelance science journalist and the executive director of the Society of Indonesian Science Journalists. So I'm going to moderate this session in the next 1 hour or so. So before I start, I would like to read some logistical notes from Nora and Mas Hari. So I'd like to make sure that you are all joined with your audio, enable your microphone and cameras if you are prompted, and this may depend on the session. So if you or your colleague is having trouble accessing the video or audio, so please get in touch with Leonor or Nora. Second, if you have any questions or comments throughout the session, so please drop it in Q&A or chat feature of the Zoom window or on the event platform or the paid loop. But however, because we intend to make the session more interactive, you can also raise your hand and say your questions directly to us. Also, all of our stations have simultaneous translation available between English and Bahasa Indonesia. So please select your preferred language by clicking the interpretation icon on the Zoom or stream window and just send the Pulitzer team a message if you need help. So finally, we will record all sessions in both languages and post them to Pitloop within 24 hours after the session ends. So thank you very much for your attention. Everyone, because as you know, today's session, as you might have read in the WhatsApp group, we are aiming to make a more interactive session. So unlike the previous session yesterday, which focused more on the science, today we are going to have an interactive discussion on the journalism sides about the craft of writing biodiversity stories, about how to make an impactful story, so on and so forth. And here we have two panelists, actually. The first is Rhett Butler, the founder of Mongabay, but he has recorded his presentation and I will share his video. And the second, we have Yao Hua Law. Yao Hua is a freelance science journalist in Malaysia, who is also the founder of Macaranga and also Rain Fellow in Pulitzer. So let me share my screen just to guide us. Right, can you see my screen? Okay. Oh, sorry. So yeah, so we are aiming to have an interactive discussion. So I repeat it once again. If some of you have questions or answers, please directly say your comments by raising your hands, but you still can also send your questions in the Q&A box. And these are the questions that I have posted in our WhatsApp groups. So I just want to remind you all about these questions, and probably some of you have already, have already had the answers for this. But however, we will let our panelists to spark the discussion first. So I will, all right. Okay, this is Rhett. Okay. You can see the video.
Hi, I'm Rhett Butler, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mongabay.
We can hear him, but we can't see him.
Thank you for having me. I prepared a presentation, so I'm just going to set that up now to share.
Sorry, say it again.
We don't see the video. We can only hear his voice.
All right. Wait.
I think you should play the video and then share the screen.
All right, okay. Can you see the video?
Yes, now.
Okay.
Here, give me a second. Okay, hopefully that's working. So people often ask me why I started Mongabay. Well, Mongabay was really born early for me. As a child, I was very interested in wildlife, and I really liked reptiles and amphibians. And I felt that the most interesting reptiles and amphibians were in the rainforest. So I always wanted to go to the rainforest. And I was very privileged to have a mother who was a travel agent and a father who traveled a lot for business. So I had a few opportunities as I was growing up to visit tropical forests, and I thought they were amazing. The thing that led me to actually start Mongabay occurred when I was 17. I went to Sabah in Malaysia, Borneo, and I had an amazing time in this beautiful forest, which was full of all sorts of amazing wildlife, beautiful insects, interesting reptiles and amphibians, and of course, all sorts of other wonderful wildlife. So I had an incredible time hiking through that beautiful forest. But a few months after I visited, the forest was destroyed to make paper for wood pulp. So the destruction of that forest led me to decide to do something to try to make a difference. And so when I was at the university, I began writing a book about tropical forests. My major actually was math, business, and econ, or economics. But I worked on the book on the side, and thanks to some credits I had for college, I was able to graduate a year early. And I spent that extra year working on this book, which I finished, and I pitched it to a bunch of publishers. One said they were interested. They did peer reviews, and they came back and they said, we'd like to publish this book, but we don't have money to put pictures in it. So instead, we're going to publish what's basically a textbook. And to me, that really defeated the purpose of what I was trying to do, which was convey the beauty of rainforests. And so I decided that I didn't write this book for money. I wrote it for impact, and I posted it on the internet so people could read it for free. And I decided to name it after an island off Madagascar. I anglicized the name of the island and called it Mongabay. The reason I chose this name was this island was kind of my idea of paradise. It was covered with rainforests, surrounded by coral reefs, and had all sorts of interesting animals. But the reality was I didn't think I was going to run a website for a living. I needed a real job. And so I started working in Silicon Valley for a tech startup. But nights and weekends, I continued to work on the website. It started to grow popular to the extent that I was able to quit my job and start following my passion. So that's what I did in the first few years of Mongabay. It was just me. One of the first things I did was create a section for children that was translated by native speakers in 40 languages. I started taking photos everywhere I went. Someone had that problem of not having images to illustrate articles. I've now taken and posted over 150,000 on the site. And then I started the news section, which is what Mongabay is most known for, and the reason I'm speaking with you today. So the first 10 years of Mongabay, it was mostly me. I brought on an intern who eventually joined my staff. So I decided to start a nonprofit in order to pursue some of these other ideas. And the first project I started once I began the nonprofit was called Mongabay Indonesia, which is our Indonesian language environmental news service. Mongabay Indonesia took off, and we learned a lot from running that operation. We were able to expand the global English site, and then since then we've expanded into other markets. And so that's kind of like a brief history of Mongabay. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, but today we have about 700 contributors in about 80 countries, and we have about 60.
So, excuse me, everyone. So, we are now hearing an adhan. This is the call for prayer. So, do you want me to continue with the video, or we'll just wait after the adhan stop?
I think we can hear Rhett fine. If it's okay, we can continue. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay.
Staff. So I also wanted to talk about some of the broader trends in biodiversity coverage. Well, I guess I'll start with biodiversity generally. So one of the things that I think we're all aware of is biodiversity loss is real, it's happening, and it's accelerating. One of the other trends that I've seen over the course of my 20 plus years of running Mongabay, but especially more, I would say, even really since the pandemic, has been connecting biodiversity to people. So things like pollinators, carbon storage, things of that nature. So really around ecosystem services. What really accelerated with the pandemic has been the concept of One Health, where it's the idea that healthy ecosystems lead to healthy people, or healthy people's health is underpinned by healthy biological ecosystems. So that's gained a lot of currency. A lot more people are paying attention to what's happening in forests and other ecosystems. They're talking about things like the impact of wildlife trade and spreading disease, things of that nature. Another major recent trend in biodiversity has been looking at how to better leverage technology for understanding biodiversity, but then also monitoring it and really getting a sense of the trends. So that's everything from using satellites to look at tree cover or coral reefs, to sensors in the forest, like bioacoustic sensors, to drone technology, and eDNA. So there's just like a lot going on there, and it's definitely accelerating. And then I guess another major trend would be greater recognition of the role that indigenous peoples and local communities play in achieving conservation outcomes. So a large chunk of the world's most intact and healthy ecosystems are occupied or inhabited by indigenous peoples. And so there's a reason why these areas are still healthy and productive, and it's because those people are there. And so a lot of the big NGOs are now becoming aware of that, and they're changing their narrative, which used to be more around kind of fortress conservation, where the idea was you would establish a protected area and then you would defend against it. Now, again, there's greater recognition that indigenous peoples, local communities are part of the solution. So that's definitely a major trend, and I would say that's really accelerated in the last 5 years. So pitching Mongabay stories on biodiversity. If you haven't written for us before, it's a good idea to start with a story that's related to one of our open projects, which is listed, at least for English, on mongabay.org. Mongabay Indonesia has their own process. If you go through those steps, you'll eventually come to a pitch form on the website, which will direct your pitch to the proper editor. So that's the process for sending us a story. And some things to think about when you're developing your pitch would be the audience. So Mongabay's monthly readership is about 8 million. So it's not small, but the people that are kind of core user groups are people who are making decisions around natural resource management, people in the conservation sector, activists, journalists, people like that. So it tends to be people with more, I guess I would say, specialized knowledge, but the style that we write stories in is very mass market. So that's something to consider. Also, just the relevance of your story. So how does your biodiversity story connect to the average person? Like, why should they care about it? Like, what's the relevance of it? And then the novelty. So is this like a new idea? Is it just another story about, tiger poaching or, the ivory trade or something like that? Or is there like a new angle? So there's a lot of topics that are of interest to Mongabay, which are on mongabay.org, which again has those pitch forms. So again, I suggest going to mongabay.org and looking at opportunities to get a sense of the kind of areas we're currently seeking pitches. On the biodiversity front, here are a few of the areas that are, kind of very much of interest to us right now. So one of those is how technology is being used to protect nature. We have an initiative called Wild Tech, which specifically is looking at different forms of technology, like the ones I mentioned before, protecting forests, helping protect oceans and other ecosystems. Indigenous-led conservation is another initiative for us that's currently open, and so that's looking at conservation projects that are really indigenous-led. So again, this is kind of recognizing that trend where indigenous peoples are being put more at the center of conservation decision making and integrated into projects. Solutions are also very much of interest to us, but not greenwashing. So it's important that any solutions journalism is based on real solutions, because there are a lot of projects out there where there's very good marketing, but there aren't necessarily great proof of outcomes. So again, we're interested in solutions, but just be sure that they're real solutions. We're also very interested in stories that use data. So that could be data from satellites, it could be data from sensors. So those sort of stories are very much of interest to us. And then Mongabay was born really out of tropical forests. And so we have a disproportionate amount of coverage on tropical forests. So if you have a story about tropical forests, biodiversity, there's a good chance we will be potentially interested in it. And then lastly, if you have stories that have really strong visual elements like great photos or nice charts or great maps or things like that, that also is very helpful. So just to reiterate, if you're looking to pitch Mongabay, I recommend going to mongabay.org and looking at the open opportunities. If you've already written for Mongabay, then you sort of know the drill. You can reach out to the editors you've worked with before and send your pitches that way. So with that, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. And so just thanks again.
Okay, so thank you very much, Rhett Butler. He's in the US right now, but I think his presentations is very, very interesting and very helpful. He underlines some points, the topics that intersect with biodiversity, like technology, indigenous people, and a few other topics that are actually, the Mongabay is looking for. So I think this is a great, chance for us as Southeast Asian journalists to jump in and to start writing for international outlets like Mongabay. Although I think it is also important to write stories for our people, Southeast Asia, and that's the thing that we are going to discuss later with Yao Hua. So I think I'm gonna go to Yao Hua. So Yao Hua, could you please share your experience in covering biodiversity and forest stories right now? I know that you have reported many interesting stories in the past few years, and we would like to hear the experiences from you.
All right, thanks, Dina. Hello, everyone. Happy and honored to be able to share my experience here and to later join in a discussion with everyone. So I'm going to share screen and hopefully this works. Can you guys see my PowerPoint now? Dina, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, it looks fine, right? I don't have to make it full screen. It looks okay? It's clear?
Okay, yeah,
clear. All right. Okay, thanks. So I'm only going to speak for 5 minutes to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to share a couple of the stories I've written, and I'll share what the story is about, how I did the reporting, and what was involved. So that leads then to our discussion later on. So I'm a freelance science journalist in KL, Kuala Lumpur. But I'm also the co-founder and editor of Macaranga. That's an environmental journalism portal focused on Malaysia. So the stories I'm going to share today, it's actually not from Macaranga because Dina asked me to use stories from before. So I'm going to share 4 stories. Actually just 2, but I'm just going to show you some of the other stories. So stories on monkey malaria, which was published in 2018. That's related to One Health and deforestation and zoonotic diseases. And then the second story is on poaching of this blue-legged tarantula. So that's on wildlife trafficking and biodiversity. And then the other 2 stories I don't think I'll have time to talk about is it's actually much simpler. and really straightforward, no complex issues, but very fun stories about wildlife and biodiversity and forest, right? But I'm going to talk about the first two because we don't have much time. So the monkey malaria story, this was published in 2018. The gist of it, and this was a feature story for Science News, and the whole story took place in Sabah, right? Sabah, which is the state of Borneo, Malaysia, and then Malaysian Borneo, and then also in Peninsular Malaysia. The gist of the story is that although human malaria, the cases of human malaria has been decreasing in Malaysia, but the cases of monkey malaria infections in humans have been rising in the past, right? And there's ample evidence to show that that rise in monkey malaria in humans is caused by, or very much associated with deforestation. Monkey malaria, it's nothing new. It has been around for a very, very long time. And zoologists and doctors don't really consider it much in a public health sense because it doesn't kill people and it's not that common. But recent research found that it can kill. There's one type that can kill, and it has been under-detected, right? So it's actually a lot more common than we thought. And what's important is that recently with all the deforestation, the clearing of forests for oil palm or whatever agriculture, that has led to a rise, right? And there's strong evidence now showing that once a forest has been cleared for oil palm, in the following few years, you will see a spike in monkey malaria cases in human. Monkey malaria is malaria that is transmitted among the monkeys, but then from monkeys also into humans, right? And so that's the gist of it, right? It's One Health, is zoonotic diseases emerging from our deforestation activities, and that's it. I got onto this story. If I remember correctly, before my feature story, I don't think there was any big report in the media about monkey malaria. And I got onto this story because I attended a conference here in Malaysia by the Malaysian Society of Parasitology and Tropical Medicine. And one of the keynote speakers was the foremost expert on monkey malaria in Malaysia. And I found his talk very fascinating. He was giving new, unpublished information. And I wrote that into a news story for Nature, realized that it's actually more. Then I wrote that into a feature story for Science News. And it had some impact because the government actually issued a response to the story after that. The reporting that I used to do this was, reading the scientific papers. I did quite a lot of interviews. I went to the field to sort of report on it. It wasn't that successful, but I did go into the field to report on it. But this story relied a lot on digging through the archives. To dig out very old documents and studies, even those archived in the States, because the monkey malaria study here actually started in the 50s and even before, actually. So this is an example of a biodiversity, a deforestation story linked to health. It's actually the health component that really attracted Nature and Science News. Okay, this one, I realize I'm actually running out of time for my 5 minutes. I'm just going to go through this one really quick. Now, this is a story that I wrote for Science, and it's related to poaching and smuggling of tarantula species out of Malaysia into Europe. And those specimens, they were smuggled live because they were done so without the proper permit required in Sarawak. And they went to Europe, into the hands of some collectors. And somehow dead specimens ended up in the hands of a couple of UK taxonomists, and they used it to identify this tarantula as a new species. And so I got into this story because I got a tip from the photographer, and he's also, I consider him a natural historian, because he was the one who actually first posted the photo of this spider online, and there was how the collectors knew about it. There was a lot more issues involved in this one because I had to carry out like a Facebook investigation of the collectors. I had to reconstruct their whole trail of how they did the collecting and how they did the smuggling and stuff. Also interviews. some field reporting actually went to the field to try to verify the spot where they might have collected the spider. And also a lot of understanding of the law was required. So I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to use, so these are just two examples that I would like to share with you all to sort of like showcase how we can find stories to report about biodiversity and forests here in our region that would not only be appealing to our local and regional audience, but also to the international audience. And yeah, so I think we can use this as like a springboard for our discussion. Thank you. Dina, back to you. I have to stop sharing first.
Okay, thank you very much, Yao Hua, for sharing your experiences. I think both stories, the tarantula stories and the monkey malaria story, they are all interesting. And I think, zoonosis and also access and benefit sharing are biodiversity topics that are, very important today, but we rarely see many reports on it in Southeast Asian media. So I think from this event, we can start discussing, and hopefully there will be many stories on it coming from Southeast Asian journalists. So we're going to have the interactive discussion. So what I will do first is to share my slide to guide the discussion. So, okay. Yeah. So first, the question is where to find biodiversity or rainforest stories in Southeast Asia. I think Yao Hua have mentioned how he found the monkey malaria story. He found it in the conference. And that's the thing that might be new for some of us, because we might think that biodiversity and rainforest story we have to go to the field first and then find the stories. But interestingly, the important finding is in the repository or in the libraries of scientific journals, just like what Yao Hua did. So is anyone have a different answer to Yao Hua? Where you can find biodiversity or rainforest stories in Southeast Asia? Okay.
So Dina, so just to be clear, so this is really like an open floor discussion, right? So yeah, everyone can chip in. Yeah. So okay.
Yeah. Right. So I just ask everyone if you have answer for this. If not, we're going to ask Yao Hua for another answer.
No. If we do that, nobody's going to really be really active in this. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. Does anyone have an answer?
Yeah, like how do you guys find your story leads or your story ideas when if it's something on forests or if it's something on wildlife and biodiversity? Do you go to do you call up the scientists, or do you attend conferences like I do, or how do you do it? How do you do it?
Yeah, so I think we would like to hear from Indonesian journalists. I think we have some of them here. So you can speak in English or in Bahasa Indonesia if you'd like, but
in the chat room, SL Wong, well, I think there must be Siulin Wong, my partner at Macaranga. Right. She said that I assume so local communities could be a people, I guess the people who are living by or in the forest. Mm-hmm. Do you do that, Dina?
Yeah, well, I haven't had many chances to go to the field. So I think I mostly rely on scientific journals and getting in touch with scientists. For example, I got my story idea about finding the nickel loving plants story by scrolling my Facebook timeline and getting connected with scientists, especially those in Southeast Asia. We don't have press rooms. I mean, universities doesn't have communication officers, something like that. And the scientists, they promote their science in their social media. So I think it's very helpful if we can get connected to them through social media, even though not all of them use it. But I find it very helpful because they post the summary where, you know, the free papers, and and that's helpful.
Yeah, some journalists, like they make it very public and open, right? That their direct messages is the DM is open or something like that, you know, on Twitter, and then they just, you know, encourage scientists or anyone with a tip to like send them messages, right? I have tried doing that. I guess I'm not so popular. I've only received very few tips that way, but I only have, you know, I have very few followers. So people with like thousands of followers could probably do much better. I know some of our participants here have like tens of thousands. Yeah, but okay. Audrey said that she gets story ideas by monitoring biodiversity records.
Audrey, do you want to speak directly, verbally? We can turn on your...
sure. Hi. Yeah, so in Singapore we have there's a news site, not really news site, scientific record site, which kind of monitors what are some kinds of new biodiversity that we have in Singapore. And because in Singapore all forest is gone and a lot of stuff has gone extinct, so whenever some interesting wildlife make their way over here from Malaysia, it's always very interesting. Recently, we had a green broadbill that was considered extinct in Singapore, spotted again. And I think stories like this create a lot of buzz. Yeah, but whether we can go further and develop it, sometimes it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, maybe it just, you know, passes by Singapore on its way to Indonesia.
Yeah.
That's the end of your story. Okay.
Yeah. So another answer from Justin. Jesse, do you want to speak directly? Well, he says that monitoring the news cycle is helpful. Yeah, okay. Hi, Jesse, can you elaborate more?
Hello, can I be heard?
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Hello, nice to be here. I'm Gisette. I'm a journalist from Manila, Philippines. And I've been covering biodiversity stories for quite some time now, and I found that just by monitoring what happens in the news cycle is very helpful, even if it's not necessarily related to the environment. Like, for example, you'd see reports of wildlife rescues or confiscations in ports that can usually lead to bigger stories on illegal wildlife trade, for instance, and can also help you point to some people in government that you can talk to. They may not be necessarily working, for instance, in the environment ministry, but they could be like police officers or customs officials who are quite familiar with these kinds of tips as well. And I've also found that in the Philippines, civil society organizations are very good sources. So they're usually very vocal on issues relating to biodiversity loss or deforestation or, you know, commercial destructive activities. So yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jesse. Like, you know, like news cycle or just reading like news, because news are shorter, right? And then often the reporter is like, you know, limited by resources. They just stop there. And it's like so rich in ideas, and you can always go in and then like develop more feature stories or I guess more intimate reporting kind of stories, you know, about the person or behind the scenes kind of a thing. Yeah, plenty of those. Yeah, plenty of those.
Yeah. I also heard some of my friends, you know, in Africa, in Latin America, and even Indonesia, news in the newspaper, you know, and then they find bigger stories from it, and they did the investigations, and yeah, I think it's really work. Yeah. So from the Philippines, and now we got comments from Thailand. Yeah. So there's a public Facebook group called Siamesis where people and conservationists ask questions and discuss about species. So Nisha, do you want to talk more about it and speak directly?
Hi, I'm Nisha. I'm from Thailand, and hi. And so, like in Thailand, there's a public Facebook group created by a scientist. His name is Non, and he's an expert on fish. And he's also the representative of the biodiversity representative for Thailand. And he created this group to be a public discussion for people. And people often, like, you can find a lot of story hints there. They often post photo of like species, like animals, bugs, plants, and ask the question about it. And there's also like a lot of controversial debates on a lot of conservation stuff. Like, for example, is building dam good? Or there's a lot of projects, volunteer projects, like building dams in the streams, in the forest in Thailand. So people come to debate about it, and you can like connect to sources and have a story hints there.
Yeah, interesting. So I think, yeah, social media is very helpful for us journalists to track the stories, right?
Yeah, actually, a point here is sorry, Dina. Just a quick point. The Facebook groups, right? In Facebook groups, if you know, I think for people who are interested in wildlife trafficking, you know that there are groups, you know, just on that, right? If you can find your way into it, then of course it's like a wealth of information and story leads that you can get. Yeah.
So another comment from Victoria Milko. She says that reading academic studies, speaking to local residents. Victoria, do you want to share your thoughts about these questions more? Oh, unavailable by audio. Okay. Okay, yeah. So I think her answers have been elaborated by Yao Hua and others. So we go straight to the next question. Okay. How to report stories for impact? So this is a difficult question. So yeah, Yao Hua, I think your tarantula stories, what's going on after the publication?
The tarantula story got a lot more resonance than I expected. I think a lot of it was because on one side, the hobbyists, the tarantula or maybe insect or arthropod collectors felt very strongly about the issue. Some agreed, some disagreed with how the collectors were treated in the story. And on the other hand, the scientists, what it meant is that some people agreed with sympathized with what the collectors did, some did not. And on the other hand, the scientists, right, because the taxonomists were involved too, scientists were actually debating whether the taxonomists did anything wrong at all by using date specimens given to them to identify a new species, because the argument was that if they don't identify the species, you know, that forest in Sarawak would be gone sooner or later because deforestation is so rampant here in Southeast Asia. That's the general argument. So that's that. Forum and the responses, there's quite a strong current of colonialism, you know, like people thinking that saying that Europeans coming over and take our stuff is very colonial, and people feel very strongly about that. So there's all these messages, you know, that I didn't really intend, but then it actually created a lot of discussion for that after the story. After the story. And I guess the impact of the story was I think the best thing about that story was that it was quite detailed and it presented the start to end of the whole process, including how they wrap it and then they sent it. So I thought that was quite impactful or quite valuable and gave people quite a bit of talking point and to really picture how the process was done, whether they agree with it or not. Your mic is off, Dina.
Yeah, sorry. So I want to ask you and other participants, what are the elements of a story that make it impactful? Maybe you can start the discussion.
Well, for sure, the message has to be clear. Well, the characters would be very important for me. The characters would be very important. And somehow you must be able to make the readers sort of feel for the character or feel for the issue. That is most important. But whether the issue is hard to predict. It's not hard to predict. Like the monkey malaria story, I did not predict that it would be quite hotly debated or discussed also, but it did. And for reasons that I am not very sure also. But I think it was written maybe like it gave a good flavor of the place of the issue with enough details and so that the readers could actually, I guess, easily identify with what's happening and with the people. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think a good story, good impactful story have to have characters that people can relate. So other participants, everyone, I'm sure that you are all great journalists because you're all part of this group in the Southeast Asia Pulitzer Rainforest program. So do you have some comments or answers for these questions? No?
Well, okay. I think it would be good to see if anyone has any ideas on like stories, stories that you didn't know would have an impact, I guess, but then you and what actually happened. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Nora says that there are many kinds of impact. Some great stories raise awareness, others also shed light on actors that need to be held accountable and maybe can spur institutional actions. So Aidila Razak also asked, so how do you measure impact? But for me, like personally, when I read stories, like impact should be something like, have a wide scale, like the change of policy. I think that's a very, very big goal. But I think like, people start changing their mind about a topic, or maybe we change how the story of a controversy goes. I think that's also an impact. So do you agree?
I think it's very hard to measure impact. I think Adila is definitely spot on in asking that. When we write grants, right, very often they ask us to tell us what's the impact, and the most basic thing they ask for is that how many shares and tweets and views it get. But we all know those don't really reflect the real picture, right? Yeah, I can get like 10,000 likes and then like only 100 views and then only 1 minute view of it. So I think policy change is definitely there. And if the people who were afflicted in the story, their life were improved, I think that to me it's like personal awesome impact that I would really like to see. Yeah.
It's really hard to measure, but right now in the age of online media, I think the number of retweets or how many likes, all the clicks, they're all measured. Even maybe I know like some like award program or journalism award program, something like that, they ask about the numbers. But I agree that just like Jesset says here, that on impact, starting small works. The more people talk about environment stories, and that's already a start. And I think I agree with that. And so there is comment from Franco Dengo. Franco has ever written a story about Sulawesi Hornbill, Julang Sulawesi. And he says that he ever write a story that is very interesting, and he thinks that an interesting story could be impactful. He says that a hunter then realized that what he did was wrong, and now he became the protector of the bird. So because of this interesting story, the hunter decided not to hunt the bird anymore. So I think that's great. It's a personal satisfaction, right? Okay. Okay, Nora, do you want to directly share your experiences?
Sure, I can share just a little bit from our experience with other regions. I hope you can still hear me.
Yeah, but you have echo though. I think.
Okay, is it better now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry, I'm recording on one computer and participating on another. So I just wanted to share one really amazing story that had impact, I think had all of the elements everyone is discussing already, has inspired people to change their views or opinions on a very important topic. And it also, as Yao Hua mentioned, was so detailed and had so much evidence that could be a starting point for further investigations, either by other journalists or even by government investigators or scientists, that this actually spurred a government hearing. The National Assembly of Venezuela gathered because of the reporting done by this group of journalists, and they decided to initiate a kind of call for action, an emergency statement on the mismanagement of a very important national park for biodiversity reasons, but also for social and cultural reasons, given the communities that live in that area. So this was just a really exciting example, I think, of a story with a lot of impact, and it definitely reflects the ideas that everyone has shared here in the chat and verbally about what are some important elements of that kind of.
Okay, thank you, Nora. So we have questions from Titik Kartiani. But Titik, do you want to directly ask your questions to Yao Hua?
Or I can just answer. I can repeat his question.
Yeah.
Answer. Yeah. Okay. Titik is asking about if there's a story idea, but researchers, there doesn't seem to be any research on it. Like how can we write about it, right? I think it's very hard to say that nobody is researching about it. Probably somebody is, right? You just need to look up the related fields and then see if they're already doing. They might not have published very concrete data about it, but it doesn't mean that they have not started working on it or they have some ideas about it. I mean, the scientists. So you just need to speak to the scientists to get it. If they have not published the data, then it's awesome, because then you might be the first one to know about it, then establish that relationship with them, right? And then tell them if you're going to publish it, like, tell me first, and then I can write about it. So definitely you can do that. But very often, the topic that you're asking, that forest destruction will have an effect on zoonotic diseases, I think there's definitely research about that. Maybe you're asking about a very specific case. In that, if that's the one, then well, you can develop a story. Sometimes stories takes time. You're right. Yeah, it could take time. So I have this story about evolution in pregnancy that I have it for like 4 years now, and I've still not written it. So sometimes you just have to wait for a hook, something like that. Yeah. If I've not answered your question, feel free to just email me later, and we can talk about it. Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. So a question from Shalane. I think this is a question for Nora. The stories that are deemed less impactful on a large scale, like policy change, not likely to get funded, and what if the impacts are smaller at every local community level?
That's a great question. And I just want to make sure and reassure everyone that we always understand impact depends on so many factors, is never guaranteed. So we do ask out of curiosity if journalists have some kind of impact in mind when they're proposing a story, but we don't have any kind of measure for kind of impact being valued over others. As many of you may know, the Pulitzer Center is not just a journalism organization, but also an education organization. So we really value the kinds of impact, like, we were talking about resonating with audiences, spurring awareness and behavior change. It's not just all about policy change or investigations or firings at companies. We're definitely interested in all kinds of reporting with all kinds of impact. That said, one thing that is important to us is ensuring that there is a distribution plan lined up for stories. That to us is typically the best measure or indicator that we can have upfront, that just reassures us the story or the project will eventually reach an audience. And we understand that that's usually all we can really control as journalists. We don't know what follow-up is going to occur. So that's a long answer to your question, but in short, we don't base our decisions off of potential impact. We do like to know if the journalist has been thinking about it, what might some opportunities be.
All right, thank you, Nora. So, questions to Yao Hua from Jasset. So I think both of you can have private conversation about that, and then we'll start to the next question. So, what are the issues in the upcoming CBD meeting? Okay, I think someone has to mute the microphone. Okay, so yeah, what are the issues in the upcoming CBD meetings? So we know this year, the CBD meeting on biodiversity, the COP15 will be in Kunming, China. So we're going to discuss this here, but I think I would like to share, sorry. Yeah, this is a paper from a scientist that contacted me once I published a news story about the criminalization of scientists in Indonesia. And it seems that the debate between scientists who wants to study biodiversity in the mega biodiversity hotspots such as Southeast Asia, and then the people or the government who wants to protect the biodiversity from exploitation. And this is, I think the debate is still ongoing. Even maybe I read a feature by Ihsan Masud in Nature, the head of IPBS, he was also thinking about this. So, yeah, I think this is an interesting topic that we journalists should cover, and I would like to know more about your views, Southeast Asian journalist views on the matter. What do you think is the best? Should we just give access to Northern journalists from America, from Europe, or from Japan to come to our country and study biodiversity for conservation? Or do you think that there should be regulations, to avoid the mismanagement or what they called exploitation of natural resources through science? I think this is very interesting. What do you think about it, Yao Hua? I think the tarantula story, access benefit sharing. I think you wrote another story about it, about access and benefit sharing, like last year, maybe.
Yeah. That was about centipedes. Everyone, a lot of this trafficking is done by people who who like and collect and trade arthropods, right? So as the access and benefit sharing mechanism, it's quite a big part of the Nagoya Protocol, which is then a big part of CBD. So I'm just going to paste. I'm going to paste some links in the chat room. For those who might not be so familiar with COP15, the CBD upcoming in Kunming. So these are the links that you can look into, the agenda, and then the report is quite a major part of the meeting this year. Right, but then the access and benefit sharing that Dyna was talking about is basically under the Nagoya Protocol, right? That all parties should make it fair and equitable, right, to use biodiversity materials, resources especially when it comes to utilization of genetic materials. So it kind of has this pharmaceutical kind of a bend to it, right? And all the parties that are part of CBD and the Nagoya Protocol, they have to, within their own jurisdiction, within their own national laws, right, make this rules or a framework for how they can enforce this access and benefit sharing. If your own country it has not set up the laws or established those rules, then you're not enforcing it. So basically, I mean, it's a huge thing in Indonesia, right? On one part, many foreign researchers are saying that it's harder and harder to get access to do research, like genuine research, in many of our developing countries, because it's just so troublesome that they felt. But then on the other hand, of course, the local governments in the developing country felt that, oh, we need to have this rule so that you guys don't just come in and take our resources and then use them. So there are genuine, well-meaning, sincere, hardworking, respectful scientists on one hand, and then on the other hand, I've also got replies from also very renowned scientists who just feel that all this is useless. No, not useless. The way it is done is totally harmful to science, right? So it's a very strong debate. And it is actually part of the Aichi biodiversity target, this Nagoya Protocol, to make it, access to biodiversity materials fair and equitable. So I think as a story idea, one story idea is that we can each look into our own country, our own jurisdiction. Okay, I got that word wrong again, in our own countries, and see if our governments have actually established the rules, the access and benefit sharing mechanism. So if in the link that I shared, right, the CBD Access and Benefit Sharing Clearinghouse, that's actually a very useful link. You can go in there, you search for your country and see who are the officers or the people in charge of the Nagoya Protocol in your country, because they are the contact point. So you ask them questions on the Nagoya Protocol, they should really answer you. And it also lists like all the rules and framework that your country has or has not established. But for example, Malaysia hasn't done it. Indonesia hasn't done it also. Apparently, it's not there. If they have done it, it's not listed there, right? So I do not know why it's not listed there. They should have, but it's not listed there. But that's a very good place for you to go see. Many other countries have already listed many of their rules there. And if we are looking also for other ideas to write about, CBD and COP15, a good place to start will actually be look at the agenda, see what they're going to discuss. It's very, very brief. And then jump into the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5, that report. Now, that's quite a beefy report. And it actually talks about all the successes or failures in the past decade, because the past decade is the 2011 to 2020 is supposed to be this UN decade of biodiversity or strategic, I can't remember the name now, strategic biodiversity protection, something like that, right? Where they have a 10-year plan. But globally, we have failed to reach any of the Aichi biodiversity targets. Like there are 20 targets and we have failed to achieve any of them, right? So this time, this meeting is going to be like a review, and then moving forward, what can we do? There are success stories. So I think it would be a good idea for us to look into this report and see, pick a target that you feel strongly for, and then match it to your country, see how your country is doing, what it wants to do, what it hasn't done. I think those are ideas that we can look into. Yeah.
Do you think like infrastructure's development driven by Chinese investment is also part of this CBD? I think, I saw something like critical habitat, for example, in Indonesia, we have Batang Toru, or the Tapanuli Orangutan story, which was clearly closely related to China. So do you think that, in Southeast Asia, I think Chinese development the road and belt initiatives is very stark. I mean, in the region. What do you think about it? Is that something that we should chase?
Well, of course, the short answer is yes. But also many people are actually looking into that, right? Like many of the international newsrooms are really looking into that because it's China, it's Belt and Road Initiative, it's a lot of money going around. And so those are definitely ideas that if you're able to get a good lead on it, get good quotes, yeah, you can definitely write it up for even like very big names and definitely regional names. Yeah. I wonder if other people have any ideas on, but then again, I guess if we share our ideas here, who knows? I'm not sure if people are happy to share their ideas here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Speaking about international and how they would like to follow the stories related to Chinese development. Do you think that we Southeast Asian journalists should follow their lens in seeing biodiversity stories in our region? But before we answer that questions, I think there's another questions from Barita Newsroom Batu. So he is asking, how do we know the name seen before? So maybe Barita Newsroom Batu dari mana Pak kalau boleh tahu?
Halo Barita Newsroom Batu, may I know where you're from?
Maybe this is from Indonesia, maybe probably from outside Java or maybe inside Java. So he is asking tips for us if we know that, oh, from Medan. Home, but now I'm in Jakarta. Okay. So yeah, so he's asking if we find a flora or a fauna, or maybe we're in the field and we don't know the name of that fauna or of that animal, how do we know for sure whether about the name of this animal, maybe the Latin name, the conservation status? So what's your tips, Yao Hua? You are a scientist. I know you are.
Well, I'm really terrible at I'm very terrible at identifying insects, and I'm an entomologist by training.
Okay.
Now with the phone, right? There's like all this like app to identify species, right? Not necessarily very accurate, but it can be accurate if that's a very common species or it's a very distinct morphology. And so that works. And always, of course, we are not wildlife experts. Always get a friend in scientists, right? Exactly what just said. Always have like a handy ichthyologist, fish experts or entomologist or ornithologist. Any of those just like have several at hand. It's always useful. Yeah.
Also, Joseph says that aside from the apps, always helpful to keep close with academics and experts. So yeah, I think that's very important, and that's what we in my society, in the Society of Indonesian Science Journalists, we are planning to make a database of experts so that journalists from all over Indonesia can access. I think it's great to get connected with scientists. So we will end our session in 8:15 at the maximum. So I think I will open the floor for the questions. How can we make our stories local or Southeast Asian? I think Indonesian journalists here who are in this group, they are from outside Java, and I think they have many interesting stories about it. Can I ask Franco to share his story? Franco is based in Sulawesi, I think. Are you still there? Mungkin bisa pakai bahasa Indonesia, pakai bahasa Inggris juga boleh. Belum ada yang nyautin ya.
Okay, so I don't think anybody answered to that, so it's okay. We can probably continue.
Your thoughts about how, to make our stories local. Mas Aditya is from CNN Indonesia. So, okay, Franco says he cannot answer because it's noisy in his home. So, Mas Aditya, are you there? No? Okay. All right.
Kenapa pada malu-malu ya?
Yeah, we haven't heard from
Seems
Indonesia.
like people are shy.
Right. So Mbak Titik maybe? Mbak Titik apakah masih ada di sana?
Ya, hadir Mbak.
Alright, oke Mbak, silahkan boleh pakai bahasa Inggris or bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah, Titik.
Mbak Titik, menurut Mbak Titik,
You can use English or Indonesian. Okay, so Mbak Titik.
How can we make our stories so these issues are local? Is there any difference when you read stories in the New York Times, Washington Post, or BBC with stories inside Indonesia? And how can we make it local so that readers can easily relate to the stories?
Iya, sebetulnya itu berrelasi dengan yang saya tanyakan tadi ya.
Actually, what you said correlates what I said before. When we know that, for example, there is a global issue, for example, the linkage between zoonotic diseases and the deterioration of habitat or the loss of biodiversity, and how can you basically highlight this from a local issue to become a global issue? So sometimes we also face some difficulties in writing about this. I think Yao Hua was also experiencing the same thing when he started to write about the monkey malaria. So maybe there weren't any communities that did some research specifically in that topic, but I guess we can see some correlation among these topics. But of course, we cannot just draw some conclusions without any valid data. The linkage between the zoonotic diseases and the deterioration of the habitat, maybe we don't have anyone that has actually looked into it. So we can probably break this down into the species, the habitat, and also the type of the biodiversity that has been lost, basically. So for me, I would not draw any conclusion, and I will just like tell the story as is. I guess one of the big challenges is the data. Yes, okay, we acknowledge the global issues, and it's basically all over the place. However, when you basically want to translate this into local context, it's not really easy, because there hasn't been any scientific research that we've known ever existed. And we also have some differences, and we also have some typical conditions depending on the localities. So what we usually start is that we start from a local issue, and then it scales up to global issues. Because if we take something that is like a global issue and then you translate it into local context, that would be very different, and that would be very challenging. That's based on my experience. Thank you.
Mbak Titik explanation. Yao Hua, did you use the interpretation?
Well, I did not. I think I got most of it. Yeah, I did not.
Yeah, you understand.
I think she made a good point in that, sometimes the I guess there's no strong evidence pointing there's no strong evidence that could give your story a strong conclusion or a very clear picture. But I think that is fine if there is enough conflict in the story, if there's enough matters of concern in the story. For example, if villagers are falling sick and nobody really knows why, but then you must have a hypothesis as to what could be the cause, right? Otherwise, you won't be checking on this story. And if you can't find enough evidence to really support your hypothesis, but then it doesn't refute the hypothesis also, I think it's still worthwhile to pursue it and try to write it up, especially if the affliction or the problem is really serious, right? And then so then your piece is pulling attention to this issue and calling out for scientists or whoever who should be doing some work on this to do the work. And you're giving the people a voice, which I think it's very worthwhile to do. But of course, then your challenge there is to convince your editors to give you space. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So thanks, Yao Hua. And other points that Mbak Titik explained was the challenges in making global issues local. So she explained that, so okay, this is zoonosis, but then when she come back to her surrounding and find there's little data, lack of data about the story, about the topic, and then most importantly, in Indonesia, we journalists are difficult to find the scientists or the science about this. It's just like Mbak Titik says that she couldn't find any research related to it, even though she knows that it's already happening. But maybe in your Monkey Malaria story, there was a research produced by Ekman, right?
There are several groups researching about it, and so yeah, so there is ample data to show, to really support some of the hypotheses in there. So that wasn't too big a problem for me.
Yeah. So I think the challenge and the thing that needs to be solved here, maybe in Southeast Asia, I don't know, maybe Jasad, you can share your experience in the Philippines, but in Manila, most journalists they have difficulties reaching to scientists, the relevant scientists in specific topics. So I don't know whether this is a global phenomenon or is it only in the global south where the scientific institutions do not actively reach out to media or something like that. So I think I would like to know more about it, about this issue. Jasad, can you share your thoughts about this? Are you still there? Or maybe...
Halo Mbak Dina.
Oh,
Adit.
Halo. Oh yeah, Mas Adit. Silahkan
Iya.
Mas Adit, we were talking
Mohon
about...
maaf, mic-ku baru berfungsi tadi, harus di-reload.
Okay, so my microphone just reactivated here.
Iya, sangat menarik dan sangat penting saya kira tentang biodiversity.
It's been a very interesting discussions on the biodiversity issues. Southeast Asia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Malaysia. These countries are very rich in biodiversity.
Saya kan bekerja di CNN Indonesia.
In my perspective, I'm working for CNN Indonesia, so it's more of television-based or of visual media. It would be very interesting for us to basically cover this topic of biodiversity if we have some visualizations, especially if we probably highlight some charismatic species like orangutan or hornbills and other species, and that will be very enticing for the viewers. And I'm personally eager on covering the story about insects. These are very important elements in the ecosystem, and the impact is huge. I just came back from Pekalongan in Central Java. I just made some coverage about bees and the importance of bees in an ecosystem. And from the perspective of producing visualizations or video, sometimes it's hard for us to basically make a video of a small insects of small species, and we are very limited with equipment. Maybe National Geographic or BBC, they have their own equipment, the state-of-the-art equipment. So I think our challenges more of the this type of physical challenges. Okay. Okay, sorry for interrupting. I did. Yeah.
Journalist, and he says that visualizations has an important role for science communications, and he says that he tried to make to raise the issue of insects conservation, and he's working with the visuals, and I think we all agree about that. So we we already reached 8:15 and we don't have much time because 15 minutes from now we'll have another session. I think I would like to thank everyone. I would like to thank Yao Hua for, sharing his experiences, and this has been a great discussions and good to meet all of you from countries in Southeast Asia. So I think I would like to close this session. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you in the next Pulitzer session in the chat room. All right. Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Dina.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you soon. Don't forget, you can continue the conversations on FeedLoop. Have a nice evening.